I guess I would like to start with the disclaimer that I'm not gay, trans, nor any sort of member within the spectrum of gender/sexual minorities that make up the LGBTQ plus community. I'm heterosexual and perhaps boringly so. I would like to lead with that just to clear the air and let anyone who may come across this that is a member of said community that I certainly am not attempting to step on any toes, nor am I attempting to disparage anyone in the LGBTQIA plus community. And I know, my thumbnail game is pretty terrible, and the provocative /absurd titles of my videos are kind of weird. But a few Google and YouTube searches have yielded no results for the forthcoming interpretation of the film I'm about to discuss, and I figure that makes it fair game, because this movie is over 30 years old as the writing of the script. I personally believe enough time has passed. Even with the 90s revival/reinterpretation that the Zoomer generation has brought to the table, this film has been ignored. Though, as an elder millennial, Zoomers are ignoring a lot about the 90s that I'm kind of glad that they are. Namely, the baggy jeans were way baggier, to the point of almost being a hindrance. And for some reason, the female version of the jeans were more akin to bell-bottoms, and in fact, bell-bottoms did have a minor resurgence among female and female-presenting people. Carpenter jeans were a thing, a lot of corduroy, then weird vinyl jackets, chain wallets, that weird tint of orange/red/rusted bleached hair. Also, goatees and soul patches were kind of a big thing. A lot of white dudes with inappropriate dreadlocks. There's a lot more, but Zoomers definitely made a good call by leaving some of these things in the past. Also, final disclaimer, I'm not going to use my allyship or personal associations as a shield here. If I get something wrong or even offensive, let me know. If it's constructive, I'll take it into account. This is a straight man using a straight brain while trying to see this movie through a non-straight lens, so yeah, I'm bound to miss a few things. I just don't want it to come across as insensitive or offensive. That's not my intent. For instance, I don't know what the appropriate acronym is, and so I've just been shuffling through LGBTQ plus and variations therein, but it's not meant as a slight. I just haven't heard any definitive, singularly agreed upon acronym. And from what I know, it seems to vary from person to person, and perhaps to some degree it's generational. But my current understanding is that there's just not an authoritative acronym so far. I mean, unless it's one of those weird ones that is astroturfed by fascists that try to actively excise one of the letters. I know that's incorrect. Anyway, enough of that rambling. Happy Pride, and let's jump into Son-in-Law and discuss what I believe to be a film that is at best neglected and at worst abandoned by the LGBTQ plus community, despite it being a very obvious depiction of a couple who act as each other's beards to mitigate social stigma. Son-in-Law is a 1993 film starring Pauly Shore and Carlo Gugino. It is directed by Steve Rash and released by Hollywood Pictures. The story follows Rebecca Warner, played by Gugino, as she graduates from high school in her small South Dakota town and goes to an unnamed college in Los Angeles, California, where, in under a semester, she undergoes drastic personal changes to the bewilderment of her family when she arrives back home for Thanksgiving break. The movie's runtime is a brisk 95 minutes, so it starts rather abruptly. During the opening credits, Rebecca graduates from high school, and before they even finish rolling, she has already arrived in Los Angeles, where we are immediately hit with the excesses and depravity of college/the big city. We see a boisterous, chaotic atmosphere, where a naked guy wanders the halls. We learn the university dorm that Rebecca will be living in is not segregated by sex, and that her roommate is a lesbian. It's basically a barrage of things that are meant to offend the small-town sensibilities of our heroine and her family. This is also where we meet Carl, played by Pauly Shore, the resident advisor of Rebecca's dorm, and a 6th-year undergrad. Los Angeles, am I right? Which, as an aside, Los Angeles is filled with small-town girls with big dreams. I don't understand why it's a shorthand for some magical realm of corrupting influence that destroys the purity of those who dare breathe its air for any limited amount of time, when its population of transplants is basically made up of people who, more often than not, bring their weird politics and prejudices from whatever small town they came from with them. Sure, some people do move to Los Angeles to escape the social repression of their own hometowns and choose to live at one of the largest cultural intersections of the planet because of the richness that a diverse community offers, but a lot of people are just out to use the city like a casino in hopes that they one day will win big, and when that moment comes, the very second they become rich, That sprawling metropolis that gave them their wealth will no longer seem, in their minds, like a community, like a place where people live and work. Rather, to them, it becomes an amusement park, a place they can visit before going back home to their gated communities and mansions. Despite the propaganda, American cities are not really all that progressive because of the very nature of capital. How capitalism shapes power across the United States of America is a contradiction of those ideals. The people who end up running these cities are the ones who have succeeded by the metrics of this inequitable and exploitative system. Yes, Los Angeles is blue, and it's considered a Democrat Party stronghold, but party affiliations are not always what they seem. In most instances, they are the largest institutions with access to the levers of power. We do not live in a system that rewards progressive values, so it's impossible for the systems that derive their influence from the inequities that we, as a society, interpret as wealth or power to ever truly be a champion for ideas that would inevitably weaken them. An equitable society is not compatible with the current status quo. After all, we live in a society where the billionaire class has a disproportionate say as to how the country is run compared to the average citizen. And all of this is to say that what Rebecca goes through in the very first 15 minutes of this film is not unique to Los Angeles or any other major American metropolitan area. I went to college in a very small town, and when you stick a bunch of young adults together who've never lived away from home and who are trying to find out who they are, a lot of weird stuff's gonna go down during that journey. Anyway, back to the movie. Rebecca has a tough time acclimating to her new surroundings, namely because all she seemingly does is study, and the only social interaction she has is with her high school boyfriend, Travis, played by Dan Gauthier, who still lives in South Dakota and with whom Rebecca has maintained a long-distance romantic relationship with. Things finally begin to break down when there is a Halloween party in the dormitory. Rebecca herself is not participating. In fact, she has, for some reason, chosen that night to do a load of laundry, despite the hallways being crowded with drunken, costumed revelers. One being a young Adam Goldberg in an unfortunate Native American costume, which... It was the 90s, and while redface and general cultural appropriation has always been offensive to the people who were the targets of it, there was definitely a racist blind spot in mainstream white American culture, which, to be honest, still sort of exists. Don't get me wrong, I'm not blaming Adam Goldberg here. He was a young actor with one line. He didn't have much sway in how his character was portrayed. I will lay this at the feet of the director, Steve Rash. In any case, one of the partygoers accidentally breaks a small wooden horse that Rebecca had brought with her from South Dakota. This causes Rebecca to feel overwhelmed with a mixture of anger and homesickness. Carl takes notice of this and makes a point to stop Rebecca from bailing out and returning to South Dakota. While Carl's interest in Rebecca does seem to occasionally skew into typical heteronormativity, he doesn't ever seem to have any sustained physical interest in Rebecca. Carl's decision to save Rebecca from dropping out of college appears to have more to do with seeing Rebecca as a younger version of himself. To illustrate this, Carl produces a picture of himself as a freshman where he appears more straight-laced and not at all like the flamboyantly dressed, shaggy-haired bon vivant that he is currently. And so with that, Carl takes Rebecca under his wing and shows her what it's like to truly live in Los Angeles. He takes her clothes shopping, gives her a makeover, and introduces her to nightlife. Again, there's no romance here. Rebecca at some point makes a passing remark about a guy she finds attractive before Carl reminds her that she's still dating Travis and to be mindful of that. Of course, as a straight man who's lived his entire life in the throes of heterosexuality, I'm not going to say that Carl's desire to preserve Rebecca's long-distance relationship can't have an ulterior motive. It certainly can. And maybe this is revealing too much of my own pathologies as a younger man, but sometimes when a straight guy, aka me, has a female friend who is in a relationship, there's a weird ego-preserving delusion that can develop where a guy, or me, can use the existence of a relationship as an excuse to avoid one's own feelings or attractions that he may have had towards a female friend. One can live in the delusion that, were it not for the relationship, perhaps things would be different between the two of you. And thus, if she did cheat, it kind of feels like she's cheating on you as well. I don't know. I'm not saying it's healthy. I'm just saying that this is definitely how I thought in my teenage years and early 20s when it came to friendships with women. And I don't mean to say that this gets better with time. It won't if you don't put in the work. In order to push past these sort of juvenile emotions and cultural indoctrination, it requires vigilance. Because as men in a Western society, we're so conditioned to view women in a way that treats them more like property than people. Whew. I really got off track there. Because I actually don't believe that Carl has any designs on Rebecca, be it sexual or romantic, and we'll see why I believe this as the film progresses. And if you're paying attention, the entirety of Rebecca's transformation from bookish country mouse to a brassy, bleached blonde California girl takes place in a mere matter of days, as there's only about 3 weeks between Halloween and the coming Thanksgiving break. Not to say it's a complete change of character. In the few opening minutes of the movie, Rebecca sneaks out of her home one night to make out with her boyfriend in a barn. So, we were introduced early on that Rebecca does have a sense of adventure in her. However, it isn't until her friendship with Carl is this ever fully explored. As the Thanksgiving break approaches, there's a telling scene where we as the audience are shown just how much Rebecca's life has changed. The phone calls from Travis she once cherished with her undivided attention are not just background noise to her new life as an Angelino. And I think this is a good time to examine just exactly who Rebecca Warner is. We know, to some degree, she is both accomplished and ambitious. After all, she was the valedictorian of her high school, and she did choose to go to college far from home. These are not safe choices that reflect the values of a small-town daddy's girl. These are bold acts in the name of exploration, be they personal or physical. Even after all these years, I don't know what quite to make of her. There are several readings of her character that I'll get into later, but I want us to keep in mind that she isn't as the film intends for her to be. Though this could also be because this was a widely released broad comedy that passed through the hands of several writers. For the uninitiated, Pauly Shore was a bit of a cultural phenomenon in the 90s. From the way he dressed, to how he spoke, and his commitment to physical bits. He briefly endeared himself to a certain subsection of Generation X and elder millennials like myself by just being the embodiment of the slacker countercultural backlash to yuppie boomers from a few years before. It probably also didn't hurt that his mother was Mitzi Shore, former owner of the Comedy Store and general legend of the Los Angeles comedy scene, known for her reputation as a bit of a kingmaker. What I mean to say is, this movie was likely already written and was just gathering dust in some slush pile somewhere before being plucked up by some production company and then crafted around Pauly Shore as a bid to push him into the forefront of pop culture. And because of that, if true, Son-in-Law is not the result of a singular focused vision. As such, the characters and motivations can seem a bit fractured throughout, and I'm trying to interpret what I believe to be the most consistent message of the film. Anyway, back to the movie. With the Thanksgiving break looming, Rebecca decides to invite Carl to come home with her for the holiday after hearing about his plans to remain on campus, eating Hungry Man microwave dinners for the entirety of the week before classes restart. And the fact that Carl can simply just purchase an airline ticket during one of the busiest times of the travel season, it lets the audience know that his isolation isn't a matter of resources. Also, earlier in the movie he does talk about his family, so we know he does have one he could visit. So what exactly is preventing him from seeing them? It isn't money, and it isn't because he has no immediate relatives. Now, this is complete speculation on my part, but maybe he has nowhere to go because he's disowned. Parental rejection is, unfortunately, an all too common response to non-gender conforming, non-heteronormative children. It's a pretty common issue amongst members of the LGBTQIA+ community. It is also part of the reason they are so resilient. They find family in each other. For example, I come from a pretty red state, and the one gay club that I do know of, it hosts free potlucks on Thanksgiving and Christmas because, unfortunately, a lot of people in their community have nowhere else to go. It just gives them a moment to feel that sense of normalcy, that unconditional love and sense of belonging that was unfortunately stripped away from them by bigotry. And this is where I will try to speedrun the rest of the movie's plot because, like I said earlier, this is a 95-minute movie, and it stretches for dear life to even fill that runtime with prolonged scenes of Pauly Shore getting into random hijinks and just vamping in his nonsensical Shoreisms like buddy, grindage, wheeze the juice, and just a bunch of the other nonsense he had people my age just repeating ad nauseum when we were tweens. And as a young boy, I'm not gonna lie, when I first saw this movie, I thought those scenes were kind of funny, but as an adult, I realized it's all kind of a ploy to just fill the movie out. And there's a lot of nonsense in this that is holding together a very thin plot. So, Rebecca arrives home with Carl, everyone is freaked out by her new look, everyone is freaked out by Carl and his look and general vibe. Rebecca's younger brother, played by Patrick Renna, who was a 90s icon in his own right, is the first to notice that Rebecca has a tattoo and at some point threatens to reveal that fact to their parents, though without any real stakes, so don't worry, it resolves in about a scene later with no impact. Oh, and Travis, remember him? Rebecca's boyfriend? He proposes to Rebecca, or rather he attempts to. Rebecca, having sensed this was coming, manages to rile Carl into interrupting the proposal. Without any real plan or prior discussion, Carl just impulsively says he and Rebecca are engaged, and that's one way, I guess, to stop a proposal. One can't get engaged to two people because of bigamy or something. Immediately after, a heartbroken Travis assaults Carl. However, a few scenes later, he does offer to throw Carl a bachelor party to make amends and be the bigger man. And I think this is a good stopping point to kind of slow it down a little bit, because this is the part where I am going to take issue with the title of the movie. I normally don't care if a title of a movie is abstract and unexplained, but this is not the case with this movie, because it's clear Carl is intended to be the titular son-in-law. However, he and Rebecca never get married, nor do they even intend to. In fact, it's stated several times in the film by the characters in this movie. Thus, there is actually no son-in-law, ever. Again, I have suspicions that this was just a very rushed project. The year prior, Pauly Shore had a breakout performance as a supporting character in the 1992 box office hit Encino Man that thrust him into the public consciousness. They even put him on the cover of the movie when it was released on VHS, even though Sean Astin is actually co-lead with Brendan Fraser, and the one whose point of view the movie is mostly shown through. This just happens sometimes. For instance, around the same time, there was a sitcom called Townies that was meant to revive Molly Ringwald's career, the lead from Pretty in Pink and 16 Candles. But it inadvertently launched her co-star, Jenna Elfman, into stardom, who, it doesn't matter. Most of you don't know who these people are. Oh, and I guess another version of that is whenever the film Leprechaun with Warwick Davis came out, Jennifer Aniston was the final girl on that, but she was not yet a star. It wasn't until Friends came out that, upon re-release, they started putting her on the VHS covers of it. Anyway, to capitalize on Pauly Shore's newfound cultural status, Son-in-Law would be his first starring role in a major motion picture. And it did work, sort of. Shore went on to star in 3 more major motion pictures, including In the Army Now, Jury Duty, and then finally Biodome. All had a degree of success and cemented him, at least for a brief amount of time, as a cultural icon. Anyway, back to the movie. Naturally, the announcement of Rebecca and Carl's engagement comes as a shock to Rebecca's family. However, they seem more amenable to the prospect of Carl becoming a part of their family, at least more than I'm certain most would. From personal experience, violence was not an uncommon reaction to people dressing slightly different in the small town I grew up in. Had a real-life Carl wandered into one of the few public spaces in that town, he would have been met with, in the very least, a barrage of homophobic slurs. So, the fact that this only causes Rebecca's parents mild personal discomfort is actually far more progressive than the reality I have ever experienced. Rebecca's father, Walter Warner Jr., played by Lane Smith, challenges Carl and wonders what exactly he could provide as a future husband to his daughter. And while it is couched in traditional gender norms, I can't say I completely disagree. While I don't subscribe to the breadwinner dynamics of romantic relationships, I also don't find Walter's concerns unreasonable. Having a general game plan to live with any measure of comfort or stability in our current system is just practical. Despite the engagement being fake, it does seem to stir some sort of motivation in Carl to think about what he does want to do in the future. As a 6th-year undergraduate, Carl is relatively aimless, and of his own admission, he just doesn't know what he wants to do, and is just having fun. After some grilling from Rebecca's father, Carl decides to try his hand at farming in a bid to demonstrate his worth. It is also at this point that we get better acquainted with Theo, the Warner's farmhand, played by Dennis Berkeley. He had always hovered in the periphery, and even when he has more prominence in scenes, we do not really learn much more about him. He just seems to exist to antagonize Carl while simultaneously and begrudgingly instructing Carl on how to run a farm. It's tough at first, but obviously as one of the protagonists of the film, Carl eventually gets the hang of it, and even finds out how to bring his own flair to the routine. From this moment, the film attempts to endear Carl to the Warners, and thus the audience. We find out Carl also has a knack for computers, though you wouldn't know it by what he says.
How'd you do it?
Your PC got harshed, right? Because your system heap set the wrong parameter. So I toasted the data directory, tweaked the PRAM, and reglazed your subroutine.
I studied computer science in college, and I can assure you all that everything he just said was complete nonsense. Though, I'm certain all of you at least suspected that, hopefully. Reality aside, the act of glazing the subroutine, or whatever he says, wins over Rebecca's younger brother, Zach, and they become fast friends. Carl's next target in his charm offensive is Rebecca's mother, Connie Warner, played by Cindy Pickett. He begins by sexually harassing Connie, mistaking her for Rebecca, and yet, even upon the realization of this error, he still converses with Rebecca's mother in the bathroom while she is wearing only a towel. It feels intrusive. Also, he keeps giving her creepy compliments about her physical appearance, and yet still somehow manages to convince Connie to let him give her a makeover before the big square dance. Or a square dance. I don't know enough about this town to know if this is a special occasion or just a regular event. Anyhow, Carl's makeover of Connie is a wild success. She turns heads and makes her husband Walter desire her in a way that makes him gleefully push their separate twin beds together the very second they arrive back home. For sex. Because they have separate... I don't know. It's an old sitcom thing. I'm going to stop here for a second and make a point of stating that Carl now has given 2 women in this film makeovers. I know it's probably stereotypical and maybe even a little offensive, but it's not like there isn't LGBTQIA plus programming like Queer Eye for the Straight Guy or We're Here. While I know both of these shows have LGBTQ cast members, it is clear that they are geared towards straight audiences, as a way of communicating the terms of their community's acceptance, rather than seeking permission for who they are. With that in mind, Carl roaming a small, unnamed South Dakota town and slowly giving it the Tu Wong Fu treatment isn't something that, I feel at least, can be hand-waved away. It just doesn't feel accidental. And with that, Carl only has 2 family members left to win over. Rebecca's father, Walter Warner Jr., and her grandfather, Walter Warner Sr. Carl does this by going on a fishing trip in the place of Rebecca's younger brother, Zach, who doesn't like fishing and just wants to play video games and mess around on his computer all day, much to the chagrin of his father. However, as Carl notices a disagreement over fishing techniques between the Walters, he uses it as an opportunity to advocate for Zach carving his own path with his own interests, much like how Walter Jr. prefers a particular fishing technique that his father seems to abhor. It's in this moment that Walter Sr. has a non-specific medical episode, and the scene ends with a bit of casual homophobia as Carl attempts to administer CPR, causing Walter Sr. to spring back to life rather than ever have his lips be met with those of another man. But what are you going to do? This was the 90s, and CPR jokes where the punchline was either homophobia or sexual assault were simply de rigueur. Now with all the Warners having been won over, finally, we are at the night of the bachelor party. Travis buys Carl drinks at the local bar, which he has laced with some sort of sedative. Tracy, a former high school classmate of both Travis and Rebecca, played by Tiffany Amber Thiessen, also arrives at the party's entertainment. Carl passes out just as Tracy begins her striptease. The very next day, Rebecca finds Tracy and Carl in the Warner barn together, and it appears that they may have slept together, which confusingly hurts Rebecca's feelings. And emphasis on appears, because in less than 2 minutes, Tracy figures out that she and Carl were drugged and did not in fact hook up, and it was all staged by Travis to win Rebecca back. All these details literally happen in less than 10 minutes, which ends with Carl getting his revenge on Travis vis-a-vis a physical assault at Thanksgiving dinner. Oh, and Theo is involved as well, and he is fired immediately. The end. Oh, and, did I mention that this all happened in less than a week? Yeah. From the moment Carl and Rebecca touched down on the tarmac in South Dakota, all these events happened until Thanksgiving Day, and if you remember, it's noted that the break would only last a week before classes resume. Now with the plot out of the way, I think I'd like to examine one more thing, and that is Rebecca Warner. At an earlier point in the movie, Tracy is introduced when she sees Rebecca and Carl at a Western wear store, which, I'll add, they only go to after Carl insists on getting some rustic wear so that he may fashion an outfit that is a mix of his personal style and the rural dress of South Dakota. I might be overreaching, but that seems to put another thing in the basket for me that Carl is coded as something other than straight. Anyhow, Rebecca casually mentions that she thought Tracy would have been in New York City by now. Tracy meekly asserts that she will one day go to New York City and that she is just saving up money, which is actually quite fair. New York City is crazy expensive. As an aside, this is shoddy writing. I realize it's meant to juxtapose Tracy and Rebecca's divergent paths in life, but it's also so close to Thanksgiving. The fact that Rebecca even assumes Tracy has never left is kind of a weird choice. Tracy could also be visiting her family in the town they grew up in. There's nothing to hint at that Tracy just failed to pursue her dreams in that moment. I bring up the run-in between Tracy and Rebecca because it is yet another moment that inadvertently shows a side of Rebecca's character that is incongruous to how I believe she is intended. And actually, I think Rebecca might secretly be one of the villains of this movie. A more cynical reading of her character is that Rebecca may, in fact, be far more duplicitous and chaotic than she's willing to admit to anyone, including herself. From this angle, it's possible to question whether the bond between Rebecca and Carl is genuine or just convenient for Rebecca. After all, Carl seems content with his life. So, what exactly is driving Rebecca to make the choices she does? On the surface, the film wants to tell a story about a small-town girl being corrupted by the big city, but upon further examination, the seeds for this were always inside of Rebecca. In fact, it could be argued that Rebecca actually corrupts Carl. Through his friendship, Carl has given Rebecca the opportunity to live a life she wants by acting as a guide through her life in Los Angeles. While Rebecca does not seem to offer anything to Carl that enhances or enriches his life, she uses him as a shield from Travis's proposal, which results in Carl being physically assaulted and drugged by Travis in the course of the movie. While Rebecca seems to adopt the carefree aesthetic of Carl, she is anything but. There's something that she is still repressing, as opposed to Carl, who has nothing to hide, well, at least until his fake engagement to Rebecca. And this is where I think that it might be also a fair reading that Rebecca is also coded as non-heteronormative, perhaps even a lesbian, but repressed. And Carl's continued indulgence of Rebecca's desire to remain closeted actually ends up hurting them both. One argument for this, I believe, is her aversion to sex with her boyfriend, Travis, or any man throughout this movie. It feels like a subtle wink, but not at first. At first it seems like Rebecca is conservative and values abstinence. However, she does not seemingly want to get married, and she does not, in the course of this movie, meet another man or fall in love with Carl. Yes, there is that one passing moment I mentioned earlier where she says that she's attracted to another man. But in terms of her and Carl's arc throughout the entire movie, it's not a love story. The movie actually ends in a final deceit. At the very end of the movie, Rebecca and Carl agree to maintain the charade for the Warners, while actively planning the moment to break up the engagement. Well, that's my interpretation of Son-in-Law. So, if you liked it, hit the like button. If not, you probably didn't make it this far. So, I actually enjoy making these, and I'm hoping to at least get to some level to where maybe do this full time, but even if not that, just enough to make a monthly payment on a better video editing subscription service, because Clipchamp is awful. So, if you guys would like to help me out with that, subscribe, I guess. Thanks. Bye.